I'm Captain Alexis Vinson, 29 years old, an officer in the United States Army. In my world, orders are clear, and loyalty is absolute. But on a call from my mother in McLean, Virginia, I received an order colder than ice. Her voice, accustomed to commanding charity galas, rang sharp and clipped. Alex, I've canceled the reservation at the Potomac Terrace for your engagement party. I was stunned. The digital invitations had already gone out. My team was arranging leave to fly in from all over the country. When I questioned her, she delivered a line that tore my heart out. It's just not appropriate, darling. We can't have an event like this embarrass the family. Embarrass? She didn't say it outright, but I heard it loud and clear. The man I loved, David, a self-made man, was the embarrassment. She thought she had won this battle with a single phone call. She had no idea that in my world, intelligence is key. And I was about to receive a piece of intel that would level their entire empire. If you've ever been looked down upon by your own loved ones and judged by superficial standards, let me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe and get ready for a story of trampled honor and restored justice. The word embarrass hung in the air between Virginia and my small apartment, a toxic cloud that seeped through the phone and filled my lungs. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I'm trained to take before a mission briefing, forcing my mind into tactical mode. Logic. Use logic. Emotions were a liability in the field, and right now, this felt like a battlefield. Embarrassing, Mom? I countered, my voice tight but controlled. David is one of the most brilliant software engineers I've ever met. He built his entire company from nothing, with his own 2 hands. I was laying out facts, presenting evidence of merit. In my world, that's what mattered. Accomplishment? Honor. Grit. A soft, condescending sigh came through the receiver. It was the sound of feigned pity, a weapon my mother, Eleanor Vinson, had perfected over decades in the social trenches of Washington, D.C. Darling, she began, her tone dripping with a sweetness that felt more like acid. No one is denying the boy is hardworking. But you have to understand, your father's associates, the senators, the generals, they'll be expecting something more commensurate. This little thing you have with David, just think of it as one of my charity projects. Meaningful, of course, but not something you display in the main hall. A wave of nausea washed over me, hot and sickening. A charity project. She had just compared the love of my life, the most decent and genuine man I knew, to a cause for the less fortunate. A case to be managed. A problem to be solved with a tax-deductible donation and a condescending pat on the head. David wasn't a person to her. He was a social misstep, an unfortunate choice that needed to be handled with quiet discretion, like a stain on the family's Persian rug. I pushed back, my voice losing its soldierly calm and taking on a sharper edge of desperation. What about my friends, Mom? My squad? They've already booked flights from Germany, from South Korea. They're my family. The word family felt like a stone in my mouth. I was using it to describe the people who had my back under fire, but the woman on the other end of the line, the one who was supposed to be family by blood, didn't seem to understand the concept. Eleanor let out a dry little chuckle, a sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Oh, your little military friends. How quaint. They're adorable, Alex, truly. But you know as well as I do that they don't really belong in our world, do they? They'd be much more comfortable somewhere. Rustic. A beer hall, perhaps. And there it was. The second blow, delivered with surgical precision. The contempt in her voice wasn't just for David anymore, it was for my entire life. For the uniform I wore with pride, for the brothers and sisters in arms who had shared rations with me, who had pulled me through the mud, who had celebrated my victories and mourned my losses. To her, they were just props. Outsiders who wouldn't know which fork to use at a DC fundraiser. Unworthy of the Vinson name. Unworthy of breathing the rarefied air of the Potomac Terrace. My throat closed up. There was nothing left to say, no logical argument that could penetrate a fortress of such deeply entrenched prejudice. She wasn't listening. She was dictating. Listen to me, Alexis. Her voice suddenly shifted, losing all its feigned warmth and becoming the hard, unyielding voice of a CEO closing a hostile takeover. It was the voice of Arthur Vinson's wife. Your father and I have made a decision. We will inform everyone that there's been a change of plans due to personal reasons. Period. You are a Vinson. Start acting like one. The line went dead. Click. No. I love you. No negotiation. No room for discussion. Just a cold, hard command. An order issued from a distant headquarters I no longer recognized. I stared at the black screen of my phone, the silence roaring in my ears. A profound and terrifying sense of alienation settled over me. These people, the ones whose blood ran in my veins, felt more foreign to me than any enemy I had ever studied on a map. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, tracing a slow path across the floorboards, but I remained frozen in my chair. I was a strategist, a planner. I assessed threats and developed countermeasures. But how do you counter an attack that comes from inside your own command? How do you fight an enemy who knows all your weaknesses because they were the ones who created them? Hours passed. The sky outside my window bruised from blue to purple to black. I finally forced my fingers to move, typing out a short, brutal message to my friends. Hey everyone, something's come up. Have to cancel the party. I'm so sorry. I'll explain later. Each word was a betrayal to their effort, their excitement. The sound of a key in the lock startled me. David. My heart hammered against my ribs. He walked in, holding a large greasy pizza box in one hand, a wide, beautiful smile on his face. He was the picture of a perfect Friday night. Hey, you, he started, his smile radiating a warmth that felt a world away. I got the pepperoni with extra cheese, just how you... His voice trailed off as he saw my face. The smile vanished, replaced instantly by a look of deep concern. He set the pizza down on the counter. Alex, what is it? What happened? Words failed me. The carefully constructed walls of my military composure had crumbled, leaving behind nothing but raw, aching hurt. I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. Instead, I just held up my phone, the screen still glowing with the message I'd just sent. He took the phone, his brow furrowed as he read the words. He didn't ask a single question about my mother. He didn't need to. He knew where the order had come from. He simply set the phone down, stepped forward, and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into his chest. He held me tight as a quiet, shuddering sob finally broke through my defenses. He just held me for a long time, letting me cry it out. When the tears subsided, he gently tilted my chin up and looked me straight in the eyes. His own were filled with a fierce, protective love. I'm so sorry you have to go through this, he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in my storm. His unconditional support, his immediate understanding, was both a comfort and a fresh wound. It was everything I had ever wanted from my family, and it was a gift that had come from a man they considered a charity case. In that moment, the battle lines were drawn. It wasn't just about a canceled party anymore. It was about my life, my love, and my honor. And I, Captain Alexis Vinson, was done fighting a defensive war. Sleep didn't come that night. It couldn't. Tucked safely in David's arms, with the faint, comforting scent of pepperoni and cardboard still lingering in our apartment, I should have felt at peace. But his simple, unconditional kindness had done something my mother's cruelty couldn't. It had unlocked a door deep inside me. Behind that door was a museum, curated over 2 decades, filled with exhibits of every time I'd been set aside, overlooked, or deemed secondary. And as I lay there, staring into the darkness, the ghosts of every past injustice came out to haunt me. My mind drifted back, pulling me through time until I landed with a jolt in my 16-year-old body. I was all knees and elbows and a burning, secret ambition that felt too big for my skin. For an entire year, my sophomore year, I had lived and breathed a single goal: the NASA Summer Space Camp for high school students at the Kennedy Space Center. It wasn't just a camp, it was a beacon. It was proof that a world existed beyond the manicured lawns and whispered politics of McLean, a world where what mattered was the mass of your brain, not the mass of your trust fund. I spent countless nights in the library, devouring physics textbooks, and poured my soul into a 5,000-word essay on the potential for terraforming Mars. I still remember the feeling of the acceptance letter in my hands. It was thick, heavy with possibility. I had done it. I had earned one of the few coveted spots. For a few glorious weeks, I walked on air, imagining myself standing under the shadow of the Saturn V rocket. Then, 2 weeks before I was scheduled to fly to Florida, I was summoned to my father's study. The room always smelled of old leather and disappointment. He sat behind his mahogany desk, refusing to meet my eyes, focusing instead on arranging a set of silver pens. "There's been a small change to the summer plans," he announced to the polished surface of his desk. My mother stood by the fireplace, a statue of casual authority. "The family is taking a 6-week trip to Europe," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And we need you to come along to keep an eye on Vanessa." I argued. I pleaded. I brought out the thick acceptance packet from NASA as evidence of a crime being committed against my future. My mother just waved a dismissive hand. "Darling, your sister is going through a rebellious phase. She needs her older sister there." "NASA will be there every year, Alex. A cultural experience in Europe is what truly defines a young lady." My dream of touching the stars was grounded, sacrificed for a 6-week tour of duty as my sister's glorified babysitter across the museums and designer boutiques of Paris and Rome. I watched Vanessa pose for photos in front of the Colosseum, and all I could see was the launch pad I was supposed to be standing on. The memory dissolved, replaced by another, a year or so later. The stifling heat of a ballroom, the scratchy tulle of a ridiculously expensive white gown. It was my debutante ball, that archaic mandatory ritual for the daughters of the Vincent dynasty. I felt like a soldier forced to wear the enemy's uniform, awkward, exposed, and deeply uncomfortable. I tried my best, executing the choreographed curtsies and forced small talk with the sons of my father's business partners. But all eyes were on Vanessa. Even though she was years away from her own debut, my mother had insisted she attend. And Vanessa, a natural in that world of effortless charm, captivated everyone. She glided through the room, a swirl of silk and easy laughter, collecting admirers like charms on a bracelet. Later that evening, trying to blend into the wallpaper near a potted fern, I overheard my father speaking with a congressman. He gestured vaguely in my direction. "My older one is a warrior," he said with a note of detached pride. "But Vanessa—" He paused, his voice softening with genuine adoration. "She's the queen." A warrior, a soldier. Something useful. Something to be deployed for a strategic purpose, but never the crown jewel. Never the one to be treasured. I was the sturdy, reliable fortress wall, and she was the princess who lived safely inside it. That night, I understood my role. I was an asset, not a daughter. The final exhibit in the Museum of My Memory was the battle for college. My heart was set on one place, the United States Military Academy at West Point. It was the ultimate meritocracy. They didn't care if your last name was Vincent or Smith. They only cared if you could endure, if you could lead. My parents were apoplectic. I'll never forget the way my father's face turned a deep, blotchy red when I told him. "You'll be wasting the family's connections," he roared, slamming his fist on that same mahogany desk. "A Vincent doesn't take orders from anyone." They pressured me, relentlessly, until I buckled, agreeing to attend Georgetown, my father's alma mater, and conveniently, the school Vanessa would later choose. I did my 4 years there. I got the degree they wanted. But the day after I graduated, before the ink on my diploma was even dry, I walked into an Army recruitment office in downtown DC. I didn't tell them, I just did it. It was my first and only true declaration of independence. The Army didn't ask who my father was, they asked what I could do. They saw a mind for strategy, a body I had disciplined through years of solitary running, and a fire in my eyes they recognized as a will to serve. And there, for the first time in my life, I felt seen for what I was worth, not for who I was supposed to be. These memories weren't just petty complaints from a privileged childhood. They were the bricks, laid one by one, that built an invisible wall between me and my family. A wall built with the mortar of favoritism, of warped expectations, of the painful, unspoken truth that in their ledger, I was always an underperforming asset. Their love, if it even existed, was transactional, bound by clauses and conditions I could never seem to meet. It's a strange thing, isn't it? The roles we're assigned without ever auditioning for them. If you've ever felt like you were cast as the warrior while someone else got to be the queen, hit that like button to show some support, and tell me in the comments what role you were given. And David, with his quiet brilliance and his self-made success, had violated every single clause in their unspoken contract. His existence in my life wasn't just an inappropriate choice. He was the living, breathing proof that I had finally and completely rejected their entire value system. He was my declaration of independence, made real. And they couldn't stand it. The sun had not yet breached the horizon when my alarm went off at 0500 hours. There were no tears this morning, no hesitation. The Museum of Memories had been visited, its ghosts acknowledged, and now it was time to act. Pain, in my line of work, is just data. And the data from the last 48 hours was clear. A defensive posture was no longer viable. It was time to fortify my position. My ritual began. I laced up my running shoes, the familiar pull of the knots, a small, satisfying anchor in the pre-dawn gloom. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, stinging my lungs with each inhale. My breath plumed in front of me as my feet found their rhythm on the pavement. 1 mile, 2. I pushed my body, forcing the physical exertion to burn away the acidic residue of my family's disdain. With every stride, I wasn't just running, I was reclaiming territory. This body was mine, this strength, this discipline, they could not touch it. Back in the apartment, I moved with the practiced efficiency of a soldier. The steam from the shower was my smokescreen, obscuring the hurt in my eyes. Then came the most important part, the uniform. My army combat uniform, neatly pressed and hanging at attention. I laid it out on the bed. Each crease was a line of defiance, each polished brass button a small shield. I carefully pinned my rank insignia to the collar, my name tape over the right breast pocket, U.S. Army over the left. These were not just pieces of fabric and metal, they were my identity. An identity I had earned, not inherited. As I pulled on the stiff camouflage patterned jacket, I felt the transformation. My shoulders straightened, my posture aligned. I was no longer Eleanor Vinson's disappointing daughter. I was Captain Vinson of the United States Army, a woman with a mission, a rank, and an honor code they couldn't comprehend. The uniform was more than clothing. It was armor. And it was time to go to war. Driving to the base at Fort Meade, my phone buzzed. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. A part of me wanted to ignore it, but a soldier confronts the threat. I answered, putting the call on speaker. "I'm assuming you're calling to apologize," I said, my voice flat. A tinkling laugh, as artificial as the diamonds my mother favored, came through the speakers. "Oh, Alex, don't be so dramatic. I'm actually at the Vera Wang boutique for my final dress fitting. Mom said I should call and see how you were doing." She didn't wait for an answer. "You will not believe the guest list. Senator Henderson just RSVP'd. Dad is ecstatic. Everyone who's anyone will be there." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. She prattled on about floral arrangements and ice sculptures, a completely alien broadcast from a world I no longer belonged to. Then her tone shifted, becoming magnanimous, as if bestowing a great gift upon a peasant. "Anyway," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I mentioned to Dad that you were struggling a bit. He said he could create a position for you at Vinson Dynamics. Special projects manager or something, just a desk job, no experience necessary. It would be a great way for you to finally leave that little army hobby of yours behind and settle down." The word hit me like a physical blow. Hobby. My breath caught in my chest. 10 years of my life. Pre-dawn runs, grueling training, deployments thousands of miles from home. The immense weight of responsibility for my country's digital security and the soldiers under my command. All of it, in her world, was reduced to a hobby. Something you do on weekends, like collecting stamps. "Hobby," I repeated, the single word coming out as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. Vanessa, I command a national cybersecurity unit. We protect critical infrastructure from foreign adversaries. This isn't a hobby. Well, whatever you call it, she said dismissively. The offer's there if you come to your senses. Gotta go, the tailor is waiting. The line went dead. Her casual, thoughtless cruelty was somehow more devastating than my mother's calculated malice. It was so genuine. In her world, my life's work was truly incomprehensible, a bizarre, embarrassing pastime. I pulled into my designated parking spot, turned off the engine, and just sat there. The silence of the car amplified the ringing in my ears. The armor felt heavy. For the first time, I felt a crack forming in its shell. I walked into my office, the familiar hum of servers a welcome distraction. But I couldn't shake the feeling of profound exhaustion. I sank into my chair, staring blankly at my monitor. My eyes drifted to a small framed photo on my desk. It was from a leadership conference a few years ago. A younger, more idealistic me standing next to General Colin Powell, shaking his hand. He had a kind, knowing look in his eyes. Taped to the frame was a quote I had typed out from his speech that day. Perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. For a soldier, that wasn't just a feel-good phrase. It was a strategic imperative. Optimism, the belief the mission could be accomplished, multiplied the effectiveness of every soldier. Despair was a luxury. It was a form of surrender, and I did not surrender. I looked at the general's face, then back at my screen. I took a deep breath, the same kind I had taken before my mother's call. But this time, it was different. It wasn't to brace for impact. It was to rally for a counterattack. I straightened my back, mission first. That was all that mattered. That evening, David didn't try to fill the silence with empty platitudes. He just showed up. He walked through the door with a brown paper bag that smelled like heaven, carrying 2 steaming containers of beef chili and a warm loaf of cornbread from a local joint we loved. He knew that sometimes the best logistical support comes in the form of comfort food. We ate on the couch, the TV off, the only sound the soft clinking of spoons against ceramic bowls. It was a comfortable, peaceful silence. Finally, David set his empty bowl down and turned to me. His voice was low and steady. "You're stronger than all of them combined, you know that?" he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. They're fighting a battle of perception. You're fighting for who you actually are. That's why you're going to win. His words weren't just comfort. They were an intelligence report from a trusted source, a confirmation of the truth I had almost let myself forget. He saw me not as a victim, but as a soldier. He saw the battlefield for what it was, and he had absolute faith in his commanding officer. That night, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I slept. It was a deep, dreamless, and peaceful sleep. The armor was back in place, stronger than before. The cracks had been sealed, and I was ready for the next phase of the operation. The peaceful sleep had fortified me. The next morning, waking up beside David, the oppressive weight of the Vincent dynasty felt distant. His unwavering support wasn't just a comfort, it was a force multiplier, just as General Powell had said. It gave me the clarity to see that we had been fighting on their terms, in their territory. It was time to choose our own battlefield. "We'll do it ourselves," I said to David over coffee, the words feeling solid and real as I spoke them. The decision was made. There would be no more attempts to fit into their world. We'll have our own party, something real, for real people. A smile spread across David's face, the first genuine, untroubled smile I'd seen on him in days. "Operation Engagement Party is a go, Captain." We spent the morning brainstorming. I immediately vetoed any suggestion that even remotely resembled my parents' world. No hotel ballrooms, no country clubs, no pretentious restaurants with starched white tablecloths and menus written in French. I didn't want polished and perfect. I wanted a place with character, a place with soul, a place where my friends, my real family, would feel at home. The answer came in a text message from one of my sergeants, a guy named Miller who had been with me on a deployment to Germany. "Ma'am, if you want a place with character, there's only one spot, the Salty Dog Brewery. It's out in the suburbs, Kind of a hole in the wall, but it's owned by a retired Marine. The whole place is a veteran hangout. He added a second text. The owner is Gunny Mike. He's a little scary, but he's a good dude. Scary didn't faze me. Good dude was all I needed to hear. Let's go, I said to David. We didn't call ahead. Sometimes a reconnaissance mission is best done unannounced. The Salty Dog Brewery looked exactly as I'd pictured. A simple, rustic building of weathered wood and brick, with a large American flag flying proudly from a pole out front. Inside, the air smelled of hops and roasted barley. The walls were a museum of service, adorned with framed unit patches, challenge coins, and the flags of every military branch. It felt honest. It felt real. Behind the long wooden bar, a mountain of a man was polishing a beer glass with intense focus. He was built like a tank, with a shaved head that gleamed under the overhead lights and thick, muscular arms covered in faded tattoos. A permanent scowl seemed etched onto his face. That had to be Gunny. I straightened my shoulders and walked up to the bar, David right beside me. "Excuse me," I said. He finished polishing the glass, held it up to the light for inspection, and then finally turned his gravelly gaze on us. "What can I get for ya?" he rumbled. "I'm Captain Alexis Vinson," I said, introducing myself and David. We were hoping to talk to the owner about potentially renting a space for a private party, an engagement party. Gunny looked me up and down, his eyes lingering for a second on the faint outline of my military bearing. Then he looked at David. His scowl deepened. "This ain't the Ritz, Captain," he grunted, his voice a low growl. "We serve craft beer and pretzels, not champagne and caviar." I didn't flinch. I met his gaze directly. "With all due respect, Sergeant," I said, deliberately using the informal but respectful term for a gunnery sergeant. "We're not looking for champagne. We just need a place where good friends can raise a glass and celebrate. That's all." My use of his rank seemed to register. He paused, his expression unreadable. He placed the clean glass on the shelf and picked up another. "Why not somewhere fancier?" he asked, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You look like you're used to it." I felt David's hand gently find mine under the lip of the bar, his thumb making a small, reassuring circle on my skin. That small gesture gave me all the strength I needed. I took a breath, and for some reason, I told this complete stranger the whole story. I didn't tell it with self-pity or anger. I told it like a soldier giving an after-action report, factual, direct, and without embellishment. I told him about the Potomac Terrace, about my mother's phone call, about the word shame. I told him how my friends, my soldiers, my brothers and sisters in arms had been dismissed as not belonging. Gunny listened. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, wiping the same glass over and over, his intimidating presence slowly transforming into one of quiet, intense concentration. When I finished, the silence in the brewery was thick. He deliberately set the glass and the polishing cloth down on the bar. He looked straight into my eyes, and the scowl was gone. It was replaced by something else, something I recognized instantly. The fierce, protective look of a senior NCO looking out for a fellow service member. "Daughter," he said, and the word was so unexpectedly warm it almost made me buckle. In the Marine Corps, we have a saying, "Semper Fidelis," always faithful. We don't leave our own behind. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial rumble. "Those people? They're not your family. They're just blood relatives." He straightened up, his decision made. "Next Saturday night," he declared, his voice booming through the quiet space, "this whole place is yours. No charge. You bring your squad here." David and I were stunned into silence. I started to protest, to say we couldn't possibly accept, but Gunny waved a massive hand, cutting me off. "This is not a handout, Captain," he said, his tone firm but kind. "This is respect, soldier to soldier." He then turned his head and bellowed, "Maria, get out here." A small smiling woman with kind eyes and a flour-dusted apron emerged from a back room. She looked from Gunny's beaming face to our shocked ones. "What is it, Mike?" "We're hosting an engagement party," he announced as if he'd just won a major victory. He gestured toward us. For the captain and her young man here. Maria's face broke into a wide, beautiful smile. She came around the bar, wiping her hands on her apron, and pulled me into a tight, motherly hug that smelled of yeast and cinnamon. "Don't you worry, sweetie," she whispered into my ear. "We'll give you a party they'll regret missing." Walking out of the Salty Dog Brewery a few minutes later, hand in hand with David, I felt a single, warm tear escape my eye and trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or self-pity. It was a tear of overwhelming, heart-cracking gratitude. In the space of an hour, I had been disowned by the family I was born into, only to be adopted by one I never knew I had. The days that followed our visit to the Salty Dog Brewery were filled with a kind of light I hadn't realized I'd been missing. David and I were a team, deep in the logistics of Operation Engagement Party. We designed simple digital invitations featuring a cartoon hot dog and a beer mug clinking glasses. We coordinated with Maria on a menu of pulled pork sliders, pretzels with beer cheese, and a mountain of her famous homemade brownies. For the first time, planning an event connected to my future felt joyful. Not like a strategic mission I was destined to fail. The warmth of our chosen family, Gunny and Maria, had created a protective bubble, a safe zone where the Vincent name had no power. I was naive to think it would last. The bubble burst on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sketching out a seating chart that was really just a list of friends I couldn't wait to see when my phone rang. A DC area code I didn't recognize. My gut tightened. I answered. "Alexis, it's your father." His voice was nothing like my mother's sharp, commanding tone. It was the voice of Arthur Vincent, the master negotiator. Calm, measured, and dangerously reasonable. The voice he used to close billion-dollar deals and charm senators. "I've spoken with your mother," he began, a carefully crafted note of regret in his voice. "It seems she may have been a bit heavy-handed." A tiny, treacherous flicker of hope ignited in my chest. He was acknowledging it. He was seeing it. "Dad," I started, but he cut me off smoothly. "I want to make it right," he continued, his tone warm and paternal. "I want to fund your wedding, Alexis, the entire thing." The offer hung in the air, stunning me into silence. All I could manage was a disbelieving, "What?" "I want you to have the best possible start," he said, the picture of a benevolent father. "There are just a few small conditions, of course. For the sake of appearances, we'll need to work together to select a more suitable venue. And I'll help you go over the guest list, just to ensure the event has the proper gravity. Consider it my gift to you." The hope in my chest flared brighter. For a split second, I almost gave in. I saw a path to peace, a way to have it all. My family's approval, and the man I loved. My father was reaching out. He wanted to help. And then, a memory, cold and sharp as a knife's edge, sliced through the fog of my wishful thinking. I was 22 again, shivering in a simulated prisoner of war camp in the dead of winter. It was part of the Army's SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. An instructor, a man with eyes that had seen too much, was schooling us on psychological manipulation. "Your captor's most powerful weapon isn't torture," he'd said, his voice a low rasp. "It's kindness. They will offer you a warm meal, a cigarette, a kind word. These are not gifts. They are transactions. They are tools to gain your compliance and control." My father wasn't apologizing. He was offering me a warm meal in a cold cell. He was trying to buy back control of my life. The warmth drained from my voice, leaving it chilled with realization. "Conditions?" I asked, the word sharp. "You mean you'll pay for it, and in return, you get to decide where it happens and who's invited?" Arthur Vincent let out a soft, placating chuckle. "Don't look at it so cynically, Alexis. It's a partnership. We're protecting the Vincent brand." The Vincent brand. That's all I was. An asset. A line item on a balance sheet that needed to be managed. He hadn't said our family. He'd said the brand. That same evening, a delivery courier arrived at my apartment with a massive wicker basket. It was ostentatious, overflowing with crinkly cellophane and tied with a ridiculously large satin bow. Inside was a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and a box of imported Belgian chocolates. The card, written in my mother's perfect looping cursive, read, "For new beginnings, love, Mom and Dad." Tucked beneath the champagne was a handwritten letter on Vanessa's personal stationery. "Alex," it began, "I'm so happy Mom and Dad have decided to make things right. Dad told me he's going to help you plan a wedding that's up to standard. I know you can be stubborn sometimes, but please, just listen to them this time. They really do just want what's best for you. Don't ruin things again." The last 3 words felt like a physical slap. Don't ruin things again. As if I were the saboteur. As if my refusal to conform, my insistence on loving a man they deemed unworthy, was an act of deliberate destruction. The entire narrative of my life, in their eyes, was a series of my failures to meet their expectations. The champagne suddenly seemed sickening. The chocolates tasted like ash in my mouth. That night, David found me in our small backyard, staring into the flames of our little portable fire pit. I told him everything: the call, the brand, the letter. He listened without interrupting, his face illuminated by the dancing firelight. When I finished, he picked up a long charred stick from the ground beside him. He reached out and drew a clear, deep line in the dirt between us and the fire pit. "This is the line," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Over there is them. Their deals, their conditions, their poison gifts. And over here," he tapped the ground on our side, "is us. Truth, respect." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Where are you standing, Alex?" I looked at the line in the dirt, a simple, primitive boundary. It was the clearest choice I'd ever been given. I looked from the line to his face, a face full of love and unwavering belief in me. "I'm standing right here," I said, my voice resolute. "With you." I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady. I found my father's number in my contacts list. I composed a short, clear message. There was no anger in it. There was no emotion at all. It was a tactical communication. "Thank you for the offer. David and I have our own plans. See you at Vanessa's birthday party." I hit send. There was no turning back now. I had just officially accepted their declaration of war. The text message was a declaration of war, and the first rule of engagement is to choose your battlefield. This time, I wasn't going to let them choose it for me. I was going to walk willingly onto theirs. "Are you sure about this?" David asked me the night of Vanessa's birthday party. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching me fasten a simple silver necklace. I wasn't wearing my armor tonight. Instead, I had chosen a dark, form-fitting dress. It was elegant, understated, and completely at odds with the turmoil inside me. "It's a tactical decision," I said, meeting his worried eyes in the mirror. "We don't hide. We don't run. We show them we're not afraid." He nodded, a slow, determined expression settling on his face. "Okay, Captain, let's go." Walking into the Potomac Terrace for the second time was like returning to the scene of a crime. The memory of my mother's cold dismissal still hung in the air, a ghost only I could see. The space was even more opulent than I remembered, dripping with chandeliers and overflowing with elaborate floral arrangements. It was a perfect stage for the Vinson family's favorite performance, the display of power. My mother, Eleanor, spotted us instantly. She glided across the marble floor, a vision in shimmering silk, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. "Alexis, darling, I'm so glad you came to your senses," she chirped, pulling me into a stiff, air-kiss embrace that smelled of expensive perfume. Then her eyes flicked to David. The smile tightened, losing all its warmth. "And, David," she said, her eyes sweeping over his perfectly tailored suit. "You look very neat." It was the ultimate dismissal, a verbal pat on the head for a child who had managed to dress himself properly. Throughout the evening, the tactic was repeated with brutal efficiency. My father's business partners and their wives would greet me warmly, their eyes sliding right past David as if he were a piece of furniture. They'd ask me about my interesting career, their questions laced with a condescending curiosity. "When are you going to come back to the real world, dear?" one of them asked, patting my arm. I felt David's hand on the small of my back, a constant, grounding pressure. He never wavered, never showed a flicker of anger or insecurity. He just stood by my side, a silent, unmovable testament to a world they would never understand. The main event, of course, was the speech. My father, Arthur Vinson, stepped up to a small, softly lit stage, a champagne flute in his hand. The room fell into a respectful hush. He was in his element, a king addressing his court. He began by lavishing praise on Vanessa, who stood beside him, glowing under the adoration. He announced her promotion to vice president at Vinson Dynamics. Vanessa understands that legacy isn't something you're given, he proclaimed, his gaze sweeping the room before briefly, pointedly, landing on me. It's something you build upon the right foundations. The message was clear. She was the builder. I was the demolition crew. Then he raised his glass in my direction. And I also want to give a special toast to my eldest daughter, Captain Alexis Vinson, he said. A polite smattering of applause rippled through the room. She has chosen a very admirable public service career. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, ensuring he had everyone's complete attention. His lips curved into a patronizing smile. We are, of course, immensely proud of all who serve our country, he continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Even if it is, at times, a bit inconvenient for the family's weekend plans. The room erupted in laughter, not just small chuckles, but loud, hearty guffaws from men in tuxedos and women in jewels. It was a good line. A clever, self-deprecating joke from a powerful man at the expense of his eccentric daughter. The sound hit me like a physical force, a concussive blast that knocked all the air out of my lungs. Inconvenient. 10 years of service, 20-hour days on deployment, the gut-wrenching fear of losing a soldier under my command. The friends I had lost, their faces forever etched in my memory. The oath I took to sacrifice my own life for my country. All of it. My entire identity, my deepest commitments, my greatest sacrifices reduced to a punchline, an inconvenience, a scheduling conflict. I looked at my father, basking in the laughter, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. I saw my mother, her expression triumphant. I saw Vanessa, standing in the glow of the spotlight, her silence a form of quiet, complicit agreement. And in that instant, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. It wasn't my heart. It was the last, thinnest, most microscopic filament of connection I still held for these people. The simmering rage I had suppressed for years didn't boil over. It flash froze, becoming something cold, hard, and perfectly terrifyingly clear. It was a laser. It's amazing how a lifetime of hurt can be crystallized in a single moment. It's often not the biggest offense, but the smallest, most public one that finally breaks us. If you've ever had a final straw moment like that, hit the like button for support, and if you feel comfortable, share in the comments what that one word or action was that changed everything for you. I calmly placed my untouched glass of sparkling water on a passing waiter's tray. I didn't throw a drink. I didn't scream. The chaos was all on the inside. Outwardly, I was a block of ice. I turned to David. He was already looking at me, his face a mixture of fury and absolute, unwavering support. He knew. We're leaving, I said. My voice was unnervingly calm. We turned and walked toward the grand exit, a silent, unified retreat. As we passed my parents' table, my mother shot out a hand, her rings cold against my arm. Where do you think you're going? The cake cutting is about to start. I stopped. I didn't look at her hand on my arm. I looked directly into her eyes, then shifted my gaze to my father, who was watching with a confused, annoyed expression. I'm going home, I said. The word daughter was gone from my vocabulary. It had been incinerated in the fire of their laughter. And let me be perfectly clear, this is the last time you will ever be allowed to turn my sacrifice into your punchline. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I took David's hand, his warmth a lifeline in the Arctic chill of that room, and we walked out. We left them there, surrounded by their crystal, their champagne, and their sycophants, shrouded in a sudden, stunned silence. The defensive war was over. The counterattack was about to begin. The drive back to our apartment was silent. But it wasn't the heavy, wounded silence of the night my mother had called. This was different. It was the charged, electric silence of a mission shifting from reconnaissance to active engagement. The anger was still there, a cold, dense star in the center of my chest, but it wasn't chaotic anymore. It had been forged into something else. Purpose. The moment we walked through the door, I flipped on the lights and went straight for the hall closet. David watched, his expression a mixture of concern and intense curiosity, as I pulled out a large rolling whiteboard I used for brainstorming complex network diagrams. I wheeled it into the center of our living room, the squeak of the casters the only sound in the room. "All right," I said, uncapping a black dry erase marker. The snap of the cap echoed like a chambered round. "Situation report." I turned to David, my voice crisp. All traces of the wounded daughter gone, replaced by the captain. I drew a line down the middle of the board. On one side, I wrote Hostile Forces, Vincent, A and E. Objective, Control and Maintenance of Public Image, I stated, writing it below their names. Primary weakness, arrogance, gross underestimation of our capabilities. David leaned against the doorframe, a slow, admiring smile spreading across his face. "And our objective, Captain." I turned and met his gaze, a cold smile of my own touching my lips. "Our objective is to demonstrate the consequences of acting on faulty intelligence." That was when his expression shifted. The admiration was still there, but it was joined by a new resolve. He had been waiting for this. He walked over to his laptop bag, his movements calm and deliberate. "You're talking about intelligence," he said, his voice low. "There's something I need to show you." He set his laptop on the coffee table, flipped it open, and logged into a secure server. The interface that appeared was sleek, complex, and unfamiliar to me. "This is BioPredict," he said simply. He navigated to an encrypted folder icon labeled Project Nightingale. After a multi-factor authentication process, the folder opened, revealing a trove of legal documents, financial projections, and technical schematics. "Pinnacle Tech is acquiring us," he said, his voice even. He pointed to a line in a term sheet. "The deal is in the final stages, still under a strict NDA. You're the only person outside of the legal teams who knows the full scope of this." I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the numbers, then scanning them again. I felt the air leave my lungs in a soft whoosh. The figures were staggering. The man my parents had dismissed as a self-made nobody, a charitable project, was the architect of something that could shake their entire world to its foundations. He hadn't just built a company, he had built an empire in secret. My mind, trained to assess threats and assets, was reeling. The entire strategic landscape had just been redrawn. "Before the deal closes, they're requiring one final independent security audit," David said, pulling me from my daze. A flicker of worry crossed his face. "It's standard procedure, but I'm paranoid about any potential vulnerabilities. The slightest breach could jeopardize the whole thing." I looked from the complex financial data back to his face. And then, for the first time since leaving the party, a genuine predatory smile spread across my face. My eyes lit up. "That," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline, "is my specialty." For the rest of the night, our apartment transformed into a cyber warfare command center. We worked side by side, a seamless fusion of two different worlds. David, the brilliant creator, explained the elegant architecture of his system, his passion for the clean, efficient lines of his code evident in every word. I, the professional defender, listened, analyzed, and then went to work. With the focus and precision of a surgeon, I launched a full-scale penetration test on his network. I probed his firewalls, tested his encryption protocols, and hunted for the microscopic cracks that could be exploited by a hostile actor. To an outsider, it would have looked like an attack. To us, it was the ultimate act of trust. He had given me the keys to his kingdom, and I was making sure its walls were impenetrable. As I moved through his creation, I saw more than just its financial value. I saw the genius of the man I loved. I saw the thousands of hours, the sleepless nights, the sheer force of will that had turned an idea into this beautiful, complex machine. He wasn't just a software developer, he was an artist, and his medium was logic. We weren't just a couple in love anymore. We were a special operations team, a perfect synthesis of offense and defense. As the first light of dawn began to creep through our windows, I closed the final vulnerability, encrypting the patch and securing the server. The system was a fortress. Exhausted but energized, I leaned back in my chair, my eyes landing on my own workstation monitor. Taped to the bezel was a small printed quote from Admiral Grace Hopper, a pioneer, a legend in both the Navy and the world of computer science. It had been there for years, a personal mantra. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to get permission. I looked at the quote, then over at David, who was watching me, his eyes full of a love and respect that felt more real than anything the Vincent name had ever offered me. In that moment, the plan crystallized, perfect and complete. They will never give us the respect we deserve, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. So, we're going to have to take it. I turned to the whiteboard, picked up the marker, and erased my initial notes. It was time for the real plan. We don't call, we don't email, we do nothing, I began, outlining the strategy. We wait. In their arrogance, they will summon us. They'll expect a lecture, a chance to put me back in my place after my outburst at the party. A slow, wolfish grin spread across my face. We'll accept their invitation. We will walk onto their chosen battlefield. And we will turn their fortress into the stage for our victory. The call came on Friday morning, exactly as predicted. The caller ID was my mother's, but the voice was laced with a syrupy sweetness that was more venomous than her usual icy commands. Alexis, darling, your father and I feel we should talk, she began. Let's have lunch at the Potomac Terrace on Sunday. Just family. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. They had chosen the battlefield, the very place where the first shot was fired, to be the site of my public court-martial. They expected me to walk in, head bowed, ready to receive my sentence. Of course, Mother, I replied, my voice a placid lake on the surface, concealing the tactical submarine gliding beneath. We'll be there. On Sunday, as we prepared to leave, I bypassed my uniform. Instead, I chose a navy blue sheath dress, a piece of clothing that was as much a statement of power as my Class A's. David, standing beside me, was immaculate in a dark, perfectly tailored suit. We looked in the mirror, not as a couple, but as partners. We weren't walking into an ambush. We were walking in to close a deal. The air in the Potomac Terrace was thick with the scent of money and lilies. We were led to a private table in a secluded alcove where Arthur and Eleanor were already waiting, their faces grim masks of parental disappointment. My father didn't greet us. He simply gestured to the chairs with a flick of his wrist. Sit. The silence that followed was a weapon in itself. Waiters moved around us like ghosts, pouring water, offering bread. My mother waited until they had retreated before she began her sermon. I cannot begin to express our disappointment, Alexis, she said, her voice low and controlled. Your behavior at Vanessa's party was not only childish, it was a profound embarrassment. You have a duty to this family, a duty to the Vincent name. I let her speak. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I simply watched her, my expression calm, almost clinical. It was like observing an enemy's predictable maneuver. My detachment seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. Her voice grew sharper, her words more pointed, detailing my long list of failures and my thoughtless, rebellious conduct. It was in the middle of this lecture, as she was describing my choice of a partner as a deliberate act of defiance, that my father's attention was suddenly diverted. Robert, what a surprise! He boomed, his face instantly transforming from stern patriarch to convivial peer. He stood abruptly and strode toward a nearby table where a distinguished, salt-and-pepper-haired man was seated. It was Robert Maxwell, the CEO of Pinnacle Tech. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. The universe, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. Maxwell shook my father's hand politely, a professional smile on his face, but then his eyes drifted past my father, toward our table. His gaze locked onto David. He squinted for a moment, and then a broad, genuine smile of recognition lit up his face. David Chen? Maxwell said, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. He bypassed my father completely and walked directly to our table, his hand extended. I'll be damned. I didn't expect to see you here. I just left a marathon session with the legal team about our little deal. Congratulations, young man. You're about to make history. The air at our table froze solid. David stood, shaking Maxwell's hand with easy confidence. Mr. Maxwell. Good to see you too. This is my fiancé, Alexis Vinson. My father and mother were statues, their faces locked in identical expressions of stunned confusion. Vinson? Maxwell repeated, his eyes flicking from me to my father, connecting the dots. Any relation? My father's mouth opened and closed silently for a moment before he managed to stammer. Alexis is... She's my daughter. Maxwell let out a hearty laugh. Well, small world. Arthur, you've got a genius for a son-in-law. This BioPredict acquisition is going to be a game changer for the entire biotech industry. As if on cue, a vibration started. It was quiet at first, then it spread. A low hum that seemed to emanate from every corner of the room. The phones, every smartphone on every table, including the one in my father's jacket pocket, buzzed to life in near-perfect unison. The Pinnacle Tech press release had just gone live. With a trembling hand, my father pulled out his phone. His thumb swiped clumsily across the screen. I watched as his eyes scanned the headline, then the first paragraph, his face growing paler with every word. And then, he saw it. The number. A figure so large, so obscene in its validation, that it transcended mere success and became an undeniable declaration of power. $175 million. The number glowed on his screen, bright and sharp as a death sentence. He slowly lifted his head, his gaze finding David. His face was a horrifying, fascinating collage of emotions. Raw shock, utter disbelief, a dawning, sickening understanding, and finally, fear. Pure, undiluted fear. In the space of 30 seconds, the entire gravitational field of the room had been irrevocably altered. The power, which had been so solidly concentrated at one end of our table, had just rushed to the other with the force of a tidal wave. My parents were no longer the judge and jury. They were just two people staring across a vast, newly formed canyon at a man they had completely and catastrophically misjudged. The Vinson name was no longer the most powerful currency in the room. We didn't say a word as we left the Potomac Terrace. We just walked out into the crisp Sunday afternoon, hand in hand, leaving the wreckage of their world behind us. The adrenaline of the confrontation felt like a high-voltage current humming under my skin. But as we got into the car, a different feeling began to settle in its place. It wasn't regret. It was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The war was won, but victory had left me hollowed out. We were barely on the George Washington Parkway when the aftershock hit. It started with a single buzz from my phone, lying on the center console. Then another. And another. Soon, it was vibrating nonstop, a frantic, angry hornet trapped in the quiet of the car. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, a digital storm of panic. Missed call. Father. Missed call. Mother. Text from Vanessa. Alex, what is going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out. Text from father. Call me back, immediately. We need to talk. Text from mother. Darling, I didn't mean it. I just didn't understand. I stared at the screen, a cold realization dawning on me. Not a single message contained the words, I'm sorry. There was no remorse for the years of dismissal, for the public humiliation. There was only panic. The panic of investors who had just realized they'd catastrophically misjudged the value of an asset. They weren't mourning the loss of a daughter, they were scrambling to mitigate the damage to their portfolio. The phone rang again. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, instantly. I knew this wouldn't stop. Taking a deep breath, I finally answered, putting the call on speaker. The voice that came through the phone was unrecognizable. The imperious, commanding tone of Eleanor Vinson, the Queen of DC society, was gone. In its place was the desperate, ragged sobbing of a woman who had lost control. Alex, she wept, her voice thick and broken. How could you keep something like this from me? After everything I've done for you, I gave you the best schools, the most beautiful dresses. I was only trying to protect you. I listened calmly, my own emotional storm having passed, leaving behind a quiet, clear landscape. In my mind, I heard another voice, a calm and steady one that sounded a lot like Brené Brown, the researcher whose work on courage and vulnerability had become a quiet source of strength for me over the years. Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. I didn't hide anything from you, Mom, I said, my voice even and steady. I was just living my life, and you weren't trying to protect me, you were trying to control me. The words came out without anger, a simple statement of fact. I love you, I continued, and I realized with a pang of sadness that it was still true. But I can't let you keep hurting me, and I can't let you keep hurting the man I love. Her sobbing hitched, replaced by a frantic, grasping energy. We can fix this. We'll do it over, she said, her words tumbling over each other. I'll call the Potomac Terrace back right now. We'll throw you an engagement party, the biggest party Washington has ever seen. We'll have fireworks over the river. A sad smile touched my lips. She still didn't get it. She never would. She thought the wound could be healed with a bigger, more expensive bandage. It's too late, Mom, I said softly. You don't understand. It was never about the party. It was about respect. And respect is the one thing you can't buy with a bigger party. I took a deep breath, the finality of my next words settling in my chest. I need space. Please, don't call me again. When I'm ready, I'll reach out. But Alex, wait. I ended the call before she could finish, before she could launch another volley of guilt or desperation. The silence that filled the car was immediate and profound. It felt like peace. When we got home, I walked to the couch and sat down, my phone still in my hand. David sat next to me, giving me the space I needed. I opened my contacts, found my father's name, and silenced his notifications. Then I did the same for my mother and for Vanessa. It wasn't an act of anger. It wasn't a dramatic slamming of the door. It was a quiet, deliberate act of self-preservation. It was the digital equivalent of building a firewall to protect my own peace. I set the phone down on the coffee table, screen side down. I looked over at David, who had been a silent witness to it all, his expression full of a deep, unwavering empathy. A tremor of doubt, the last ghost of the old me, flickered inside. Did I do the right thing? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He just reached out, his hand covering mine, his touch warm and solid. You did the bravest thing, he said, his voice full of a conviction that settled my soul. You chose yourself. In that moment, an immense wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to tears. The battle was over. The war was done. The constant grinding effort to be seen, to be valued, to be enough in their eyes, it was all finished. I hadn't changed them. I never could have. But I had finally, blessedly, freed myself. The following Saturday, the air at the Salty Dog Brewery didn't smell of power or obligation. It smelled of hops, barbecue, and genuine happiness. Gunny and Maria had transformed the rustic space. Strings of warm golden bistro lights were draped from the rafters, and mason jars filled with wildflowers sat on every table. It wasn't the Potomac Terrace. It was better. It was real. My squad, my true family, had flown in from all over the world. There were no senators or CEOs in attendance, no transactional handshakes or calculating smiles, just soldiers, friends, and the quiet, easy camaraderie of people who had your back. No questions asked. They showed up in jeans and comfortable shirts, their laughter echoing off the brick walls as they sampled Gunny's latest IPA and devoured massive pulled pork sandwiches. Gunny, wearing a grease-stained apron over a Marine Corps t-shirt, moved through the crowd with a pitcher of beer in his hand, refilling glasses and acting every bit the proud, hospitable patriarch. Maria bustled out of the kitchen with trays of homemade chocolate chip cookies, her smile making the whole room brighter. This was the party I'd always wanted without ever knowing it. Authentic, warm, and overflowing with unconditional love. At one point, Gunny clinked a spoon against his glass, calling the room to a cheerful silence. He wasn't a man for long speeches. He stood there, a mountain of a man with a heart of gold, and looked right at me. "They say you can't choose your family," he said, his gravelly voice filled with a surprising gentleness. "I say that's bull. Family isn't about the blood you're born with. It's about the people who fight alongside you in the trenches. It's an action. It's a choice you make every day." He raised his glass. "To the captain and David, to family." The room erupted in a chorus of hoo-ahs and cheers. This was our celebration. Later, David and I slipped outside into the cool night air, standing by the window and watching the joyful chaos inside. The sound of their laughter was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. "You know," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder, "my whole life, I was taught that legacy was about building an empire, about the Vincent name, about power and prestige." I watched Gunny wrap one of his big, tattooed arms around a young lieutenant, clapping him on the back. But they were wrong. David squeezed my hand. "So what is it then? To you?" I smiled, a real peaceful smile that reached all the way to my soul. "It's this," I said softly. "It's friendship. It's loyalty. It's creating a safe harbor for the people you love." I paused, the seed of an idea that had been quietly growing in my mind finally blossoming. It's about turning your own wounds into someone else's armor. I then told him about my idea, a way to build a different kind of legacy. We called it the Pathfinder Grant. Using a portion of the initial proceeds from the BioPredict deal, we established a foundation. Its sole purpose was to fund scholarships for exceptional high school students from military families, enabling them to attend elite STEM summer camps across the country. Camps just like the NASA program that had been stolen from me all those years ago. "I want to make sure that no kid ever has to give up a dream because of family plans," I explained to David, the words feeling more right than anything I had ever said. "I want to give them the launch pad that I never had." He looked at me, his eyes shining with a love so profound it took my breath away. "That," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is the greatest legacy I could ever imagine." The story ends a few months later. Not with a lavish wedding at a grand cathedral, but on a quiet autumn afternoon in a simple, historic chapel nestled in the Virginia countryside. My squad filled the front pews. There was no father in a tuxedo to give me away. Instead, Gunny, in his finest suit, proudly walked me down the aisle and placed my hand in David's. After the ceremony, we went back to our unassuming house, the one we had built our life in. As we stood in the kitchen, still in our wedding clothes, I opened my laptop to check one last thing. An email was waiting in my inbox. It was from the foundation, with the subject line, "Our First Pathfinder." I clicked it open. The recipient was a 16-year-old girl, the daughter of a master sergeant stationed in Germany. Her application essay was brilliant, full of a raw passion for astrophysics. Her dream was to be an astronaut. The grant would be sending her to space camp at the Kennedy Space Center that summer. A single tear, one of pure, unadulterated joy, traced a path down my cheek. I smiled, took David's hand, and we walked out onto our small back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I was no longer fighting the shadows of my family name. I wasn't looking back at the battles I'd won, or the wounds I'd sustained. I was too busy building a future, creating a dawn of my own making, one star at a time. Thank you for following my story. My journey from that cold living room to where I am now has been about one thing: learning that you have the power to build your own dawn. Family is a verb, and legacy is a choice you make, not something you inherit. The support and stories you've shared here have been my own version of the Salty Dog Brewery, a community of strength. I'd love to know, what kind of positive legacy are you building in your own life? Let me know in the comments. Please hit like if this story resonated and subscribe and turn on notifications so we can continue to share these journeys together.